12. The main thing, of course, was the sea, grayish-blue with a blurred horizon, immediately above which a series of cloudlets glided single file as if along a straight groove, all alike, all in profile. Next came the curve of the bathing beach with its army of striped booth-like shelters, clustering especially densely at the root of the pier, which stretched far out amid a flock of rowboats for hire. If one looked from Seaview Hotel, the best at Gravitz, one could catch now and then one of the booths suddenly leaning forward and crawling over to a new location like a red and white scarab. On the land side of the beach ran a stone promenade bordered by locust trees, on whose black trunks after the rain snails would come to life and stick out of their round shells a pair of sensitive yellow little horns that made no less sensitive Fran's flesh creep. Still farther inland came in a row of facades of lesser hotels, pensions, souvenir shops. The balcony of the Dryers acted the hotel's name. Franz's room sulkily faced a town street parallel to the promenade. Beyond that stretched the second-class hotels in another parallel lane with the third-class accommodations. The further from the sea, the cheaper they grew, as if the sea were a stage and they rows of seats. Their names attempted in one way or another to suggest the sea's presence. Some of them did it with a matter-of-fact pride, others preferred metaphors and simples. Here and there occurred feminine names such as Aphrodite, to which no boarding-house could really live up. There was one villa that, either in irony or owing to a topographical error, called itself Helvetia. As the distance from the beach increased, the names grew more and more poetical. Then abruptly they gave up and became Central Hotel, Post Hotel, and the inevitable Continental. Hardly anybody hired any of the poor boats near the pier, and no wonder. Dryer, a wretched sailor, could not imagine how he or any other tourist would care to go rowing on that desolate expanse of water, when there were so many other things to do at the seaside. For instance, well, sunbathing, but the sun was a little cruel to the russet of his skin. Sitting around in cafes was not unpleasant, although it could be overdone too. There was the Blue Terrace Cafe, where the pastry he thought was so good. The other day, as they were having iced chocolate there, Martha counted at least 3 foreigners among the crowd. One, judging by his newspaper, was a Dane. The other 2 were a less easily determinable pair. The girl was trying in vain to attract the attention of the cafe cat, a small black animal sitting on a chair and licking one hind paw rigidly raised like a shouldered club. Her companion, a sun-tanned fellow, smoked and smiled. What language were they speaking? Polish? Estonian? Leaning near them against the wall was some kind of net, a bag of pale bluish gauze on a ring fixed to a rod of light metal. "Shrimp catcher," said Martha. "I want shrimps for dinner tonight." She clicked her front teeth. "No," said Franz, "that's not a fisherman's net. That's for catching mosquitoes." "Butterflies," said Dryer, lifting an index finger. "Who wants to catch butterflies?" remarked Martha. "Oh, it must be good sport," said Dryer. "In fact, I think I've a passion for something as the greatest happiness on earth." "Finish your chocolate," said Martha. "Yes," said Dryer. "I think it's fascinating, the secrets you find in most ordinary people. That reminds me, Pifke, yes, Fat Pink Pifke, collects beetles and is a famous expert on them." "Let's go," said Martha. "Those arrogant foreigners are staring at you." "Let's go for a good ramble," suggested Dryer. "Why don't we hire a boat?" said Martha, for a change. "Count me out," said Dryer. "Anyway, let's go somewhere else," said Martha. As she passed the cat's chair, she tilted it and said, "Shoo!" And the cat, magically four-legged again, slipped off the seat and vanished. Dryer strolled off alone, leaving his wife and nephew on another terrace. This was the second or third tour he was making of the local display windows. Immemorial souvenirs, picture postcards. The most frequent object of their derision was human obesity, and necessary opposite, Herr and Frau Murchison of Hungerberg. A monstrous bottom in bathing tights was being pinched by a red crab resurrected from the boiled, but the nipped lady beamed, thinking it was the hand of the admirer. A red dome above the water was at the belly of the fat man, floating on his back. There was a kiss at sunset, emblemized by a pair of huge Pigalle-shaped impressions left on the sand. Skinny, spindle-legged husbands in shorts accompanied pumpkin-bosomed wives. Dryer was touched by the many photographs going back to the preceding century, the same beach, the same sea, but women in broad-shouldered blouses and men in straw hats. And think that those overdressed kiddies were now businessmen, officials, dead soldiers, engravers' widows. The sea breeze made the awnings clack. Little bags of pink muslin were crammed with seashells, or was it hard candy? A barometer in the image of a gents' and ladies' lavatory, with different sexes emerging according to differences in the weather, engaged for a while with his odd attention. A second-rate store of men's clothes advertised a liquidation sale. Local seascapists depicted storm-tossed ships, foam-spattered rocks, and the reflection of a yellow moon in an indigo sea, and for no particular reason Dryer suddenly felt very sad, weaving his way among the remnants of the sad that surrounded each bather's ephemeral domain, hurrying to nowhere in order to prove by a great show of haste how much his merchandise was in demand. An itinerant photographer ignored by the lazy crowd, walked with his camera, yelling into the wind, "The artist is coming! The divinely favored Der Gothenburg artist is coming!" But on the threshold of the shops that sold only oriental wares, silk spaces, idols, who needed all that at the seaside, stood an ordinary, untanned little man who followed with his dark eyes the promenaders as he waited in vain for a customer. Whom did he resemble? Yes, poor old Sarah's sick husband. In the cafe where he presently joined our two farcical schemers, Martha was brought to the wrong pastry and flew into a rage. For a long time she called to the overworked waiter, a mere boy with a pastry, a splendid cream-oozing eclair, lay on its plate, lonely, despised, unwanted. Less than a week had passed, and several times already that tender melancholy had come over Dreier. True, he had experienced it before, the melting heart of an egotist, Erica had once called it, adding, "You can hurt people or humiliate them. You are touched not by the blind man, but by his dog." But of late the melancholy had become less tender, or the tenderness more demanding. Perhaps it was the sun that had softened him up, or maybe he was growing old, losing maybe something, and coming to resemble in some obscure way the picture-man whose services no one wanted and whose cry the children mocked. When he went to bed that night, he could not go to sleep at usual occurrence. On the previous day, the sun, under the pretense of a caress, had so mutilated his back that he yearned for a spell of dull weather. They had been playing plop cat, standing in the water up to their hips. Martha, Franz, two other men, one of them a dancing instructor, the other a college student, the son of a Leipzig furrier. The dancing instructor had knocked Franz's blue glasses off with a ball, and the glasses had nearly drowned. Afterwards, Franz and Martha had swum far out. He had stood and watched them from the beach, cursing his lack of buoyancy. He borrowed a telescope from a kind of 10-year-old stranger. For quite a while he had kept an envious round eye on the two dark heads bobbing side by side in their blue safe round world. As soon as his back healed, though, he thought, he would start to take lessons in the hotel pool. Ouch! Really burns! Impossible to find a painless position. Wooing sleep, he lay with closed eyes and saw the circular moat they had been digging to make their beach booth stand more cosily, and he saw the tensed, hairy leg of Franz digging nearby, then the impossibly bright page of the verse and anthology he had tried to read as he lay in the sun. Oh, how it burns! Martha had promised it would get well tomorrow, definitely, would never hurt again. Yes, of course, the skin would grow stronger, skin or no skin. I must win that bet tomorrow. Silly bet. Women can measure distances in centimeters, up skirts and down sleeves, but not leagues of water or miles of sand or the upright glare of a door ajar. He turned over to the wall in order to put himself to sleep. Not realizing how drowsy he already, despite the upright glare now between his shoulders, he began to repeat in his mind their sunset walk to Rock Point. She liked bets and boats. She had maintained that a rowing boat would make it faster there than a man on foot, even a man whose back burned in each of the four positions. He reassumed the initial one, facing the door, and started to walk westward again, but this time alone. She was in the other bedroom, and had not yet put out her light. If one walked westward with the slit of the sun in one's eyes along the bay after leaving the populated part of the beach, one could find that the sandy strip between the heath on your left and the sea on your right gradually narrowed until your progress was stopped by an agony of jumbled rocks. I think I shall turn, good God, and if instead following the concave brink of Blood Bay about one takes a concentric path slightly inland as I am doing now, Rock Point is reachable, I think, in 20 minutes or less. Let us rearrange our left arm. How much more comfortable a limbless sleeper would be, and here it is, that path leading west for the floor back of the hotel. I traverse a hamlet and continue through a beech grove for a couple of kilometers. How quiet, how soft. He stopped to rest in the bed of the grove, but then gave a start again and saw the vertical line of the burning pane. He continued his wager walk. On he must hurry. Or was his pedometer slow? Or was that aspirin working at last? He emerged from the woods into the heather, and presently the path turning right and change of pillow joined the coastline again at the spur called Rock Point. Here he could stop and wait for the absurd little boat with Martha rowing like mad and enjoy the view. He enjoyed the view. He heard himself emitting a hippopotamen snore and regained consciousness. Rock Point was a lonely little promontory, but she would come to one's bed if one won the bet. On one's right. He rolled onto his right side and stopped, hearing his heart. That's better. Aspirin comes from seper, speculum, spiegel. Now he could see the sweep of the beach parallel to the trail one had followed and followed and followed. That shimmer over there beyond a tiny rock island, those kilometers east as the acrobat flies, was our stretch of the Gravitz beach where sugar lumps of hotels, the little black boat with Martha in black evening dress, her eardrops blazing, had to skirt, of course, the little black island on the outside, but otherwise, geometrically speaking, the seaway was shorter. The string of the bow, the string of the bay, even though even a weary walker. When finally her husband's snore found a permanent rhythm, Martha got up, closed the door, and went back to her uncomfortable bed. It was much too soft and too far from the window, which was open. Beyond there was a rose, steady, soft, incessant noise, as if the black garden were a bath being run. Alas, it was not the sounding sea, but the rain. Never mind. Rain or no rain, let him take an umbrella. She put out the light, but it was no use trying to sleep. She stepped with Franz onto the fatal bark, and he rowed her to the promontory. The process had put her husband to sleep, kept her awake. The rustle of the rain mingled with the buzz in her ears. 2 hours had passed. It was a much longer journey than anybody could have expected. She picked up her watch from the bed table and pondered its phosphorescent information. The sun was still in Siberia. At 7:30, Franz stirred. He had been told to get up at exactly 7:30. It was exactly 7:30. A baker in the encyclopedia who had poisoned an entire parish told the prison barber who was shaving his neck that never in his life he slept so well. Franz had never slept 9 hours. His own contribution to the murder was up to now an accurate calculation of the distance to Rock Point by land and by sea. The victim had to be there a few minutes before the boat arrived. He would be dead, tired, and grateful to be ferried back. Franz opened his window. It faced the south with no sea to view, but at least revealed a small balcony 1 story lower, on which on 3 consecutive afternoons at the siesta hour he had watched the spectacled barmaid sunning herself on a towel. The floor of the balcony was darkly damp. It might dry in time for their siesta if the sun came out before noon. By this evening it will all be over, he reflected mechanically, and was unable to imagine either that evening or the following day, as one is unable to imagine eternity. Gritting his teeth, he pulled on his clammy, bathing trunks. The pockets of his robe were full of sand. He softly closed the door behind him and set along the long, white corridors. There was sand also in the toes of his canvas shoes, producing their blunt, blind sensation. His uncle and aunt were already sitting on their balcony having coffee. It was a sunless day with a white sky, a gray sea, and a cheerless breeze. Aunt Martha poured Franz some coffee. She was also wearing her robe over a bathing suit. Green designs ran across fluffy, dark blue. She held back the broad sleeve with her free hand as she passed the cup to Franz. Dryer in a blazer and flannel pants was reading the resort's guest list, occasionally pronouncing aloud a funny name. He had intended to wear a delicate pale lemon Chinese tie that had cost 50 marks, but Martha said it looked like rain and the tie would be ruined. So he had put on another, an old lavender one. In such trifles Martha usually was right. Dryer drank 2 cups of coffee and enjoyed a roll with delicious transparent honey trickling over the edges. Martha drank 3 cups and did not eat anything. Franz had a half a cup and nothing either. The wind swept across the balcony. Professor Clister or Swister, said Dryer. Sorry, Lister of Swisstock. If you're finished, let's go, said Martha. Bluffdock, Vidomori, read Dryer triumphantly. Let's go, said Martha, wrapping a robe around her and trying to keep her teeth from chattering. Before it starts raining again. It's so early, my love, he drawled, casting a furtive glance at the plate of rolls. Why does nobody at home ever give butter that curly shape? Let's go, repeated Martha, rising. Franz got up also. Dryer looked at his golden watch. I'll beat you anyway, he said gleefully. You 2 go on ahead. I'll give you 15 minutes. I could spare even more. Fine, said Martha. We'll see who wins, said Dryer. We'll see, said Martha. Your oars are my cab, said Dryer. Let me through. I can't get out, she exclaimed sharply, pushing with her knee and still fumbling at her robe. Dryer moved his chair. She passed. My back is much better, he said, but Franz is seasick or something. Franz, without looking at him, shook his head. With sunglasses over his usual spectacles and his bright red robe, he looked like Bluffdock Vidomori should look. Don't get drowned, Bluffdock, said Dryer as he began his second roll. The glass door closed. Chewing and sucking his honey-smeared fingers, Dryer considered with disapproval the big, pale sea. A bit of beach was visible from the balcony, with its striped shelter boxes untidily scattered and slightly askew. He did not envy the hardly bathers. The spot where one rented boats was a little farther to the west, near the pier, and could be seen from the balcony. An old man dressed like an opera captain let them. How chilly, soggy, and uninteresting everything was without the sun. Never mind, it would be a brisk racing walk. As in the old days, very old days, Martha had agreed to play with him a little, and had not refused the last minute because of the bad weather he had secretly feared. He looked again at his watch. Yesterday, the day before, his office had called precisely at this time. Today, more than likely, Sarah would telephone again. He would call her back later. It was not waiting. He wiped his lips firmly, brushed the crumbs off his lap, and went into the bathroom. That cold shower had been agony, and now felt fine. He paused before the mirror and ran his little silver brush right and left over his English mustache. His German nose was peeling, not very attractive. A knock at the door. The office had managed to catch him. Dryer, beating his pocket, hurried to the telephone. The talk was brief. He wavered. Should he take an umbrella? He decided he would not, and went out by the back entrance. The 2 young fellows who they had met yesterday were sitting sideways on the beach playing chess. Both held their legs crossed. White had his hand ensconced between the knee of the left and the leg of the calf in the other leg, and dangled his right foot slightly. Black's arms were folded on his breast. Their gaze left the board as they greeted Dryer. He stopped for a moment and gaily warned White that the Black's knight was planning to attack White's king, and the queen with a forked check. Martha, who loved bets but thought them undignified, had asked him not to tell anybody about their little rendezvous at Rock Point, so he said nothing about it and went on his way. "Old idiot," muttered Black, whose position was desperate. Dryer followed a boulevard of sorts, then a path, then walked through the hamlet where he observed that the bus to Swisstock was leaving the post office and looked at his watch. It would catch the express to Berlin. As he turned right to rejoin the coastline, he glimpsed the sea and saw the speck of a boat in a blurry distance. He thought he distinguished 2 bright bathrobes, but was not sure, and quickening his step almost to a trot, entered the beechwood. Franz rode in silence, now grimly lowering his face, then a sweep of despair turning it skyward. Martha sat at the helm. Before renting the boat, she had got in the water for a minute, thinking it would warm her up. That had been a mistake. The son had made a half-promise and had not kept it. The cold, wet suit now stuck to her chest, hips, and sides. She was too excited and happy to pay too much attention to such trifles. A delightfully compliant mist veiled the receding beach. The boat started to round the little rocky island, where seagulls were the only witnesses. The oarlocks creaked ponderously. "You don't want to ask anything. You remember everything, darling?" Leaning forward on the backstroke, Franz nodded, and again stared at the empty sky as he pushed the resilient water. "When I say, and only when I say, remember," another grim nod. "Let us go over it quickly, all right? You remain in the bow." The oarlocks creaked. An inquisitive gull circled over them. A wave lifted the boat to inspect it. Franz bowed in answer. He tried not to look at his insane aunt, but whether he stared at the damp bottom of the boat, along which lay a second pair of oars, or followed the happy seagull with his eyes, he nevertheless perceived Martha with his entire being, and saw, even without looking, her rubber cap, her broad-jawed, dreadful face, her shaven shins, her heavy coronation robes, and he knew exactly how it all would be. How Martha would cry out the password, how both rowers would stand up to change places, the boat would rock, not easy to get past each other. "Careful, one more step, nearer, now. Remember, just one big push, with your whole body," said Martha, and he slowly bent forward again. "You must send him flying out, toppling in, face forward, and then you row like heck." Now a chill breeze was penetrating her body with dampness, and yet the elation persisted. She gazed intently at the incurved shore, at its fringe of forest and the mauve stretch of heather, searching for the place near a pointed rock where they were to land. She saw it. She pulled taut the left rope of the rudder. Franz, as he swung backwards with a soundless moan, heard Martha laugh hoarsely, cough, clear her throat, cough, laugh again. A sizable wave took possession of the boat. He stopped rowing for a moment. The sweat trickled down his temples in spite of the cold. Martha rose and fell with the wave's motion, shivering, aged beyond belief, her gray face shining like rubber. She was watching a tiny dark figure that had suddenly appeared on the deserted strip of jutting land. "Quicker," she said, trembling and plucking at the icy cold, clinking bathing suit as if it were a sheet, and she dying. "Oh, please, he's waiting." Franz laid down the oars, slowly took off both pairs of glasses, slowly wiped the lenses of both on the flap of his robe. "I told you to hurry," she shouted. "You don't need those silly sunglasses, Franz, do you hear?" He put the sunglasses into the pocket of his robe. He raised the other pair skyward. He looked through the lenses at the clouds, and he slowly put them on and took up the oars again. The dark little figure became more distinct and acquired a face like a grain of maize. Martha was moving her torso back and forth, perhaps repeating Franz's movements, perhaps trying to speed up the boat. Now the blue jacket and the gray pants were indistinguishable. He stood with his feet planted apart and his arms akimbo. "This is the critical moment," said Martha, already speaking in a whisper. "He will never get into a boat if he does not now. Try to look more cheerful." She was twisting the ends of the rudder ropes in her hands. The shore was drawing near. Dryer stood looking at them and smiling. In his palm he held a flat gold watch. He had arrived 8 minutes ahead of them. 8 whole minutes. The boat was called Lindy. Cute. "Welcome," he said, putting his watch back in his pocket. "You must have run all the way," said Martha, breathing heavily and glancing around. "Nothing of the sort. Took it easy, even stopped to rest along the way." She continued her survey. "Sand, rocks, and further on, heathery slopes and woods. Not a soul, not a dog ever came here. Get into the boat," she said. Lapping little waves jolted the boat ever so slightly. Franz was listlessly fussing with the second pair of oars. Dryer said, "Oh, I'll return the same way. It's wonderful in the woods. I made friends with a squirrel. We'll meet at the Siren Cafe." "Get in," she repeated sharply. "You can row a little. You're getting fat. Look how tired Franz is. I can't row alone. Really, my love, I don't feel like it at all. I hate rowing, and my back smarts again." "All right," she said. "It was part of the bet, and if I don't get in at once, I'm not paying. The bet is cancelled." Martha was slapping her palm with the rudder rope. He rolled up his eyes, sighed, and trying not to wet his feet, started cautiously to get into the boat. "Illogical and unfair," he said, and fell down heavily in the middle seat. The second pair of oars were in the locks. Dryer took off his blazer. The boat moved off. A sense of blissful peace now descended on Martha. The plan had worked. The dream had come true. A deserted beach, a deserted sea, and fog. Just to be safe, they should go out some distance north of the shore. An odd, cool, not unpleasant emptiness was in her chest and head, as if the breeze had blown right through her, cleaning her inwardly, removing all the trash. And though that cool vibration, she heard his carefree voice. "You keep getting tangled up in my oars, Franz. That's no way to row. You have never rowed in your life, I suspect. Of course, I can understand that your thoughts are far away. There again, you must pay a little more attention to what I'm trying to do. Together, together. She hasn't forgotten you. I hope you left her your address. 1, 2. I'm positive there will be a letter for you today saying she's with child. Rhythm, rhythm." Franz watched his firm, stout neck, the yellow strands of his hair thinning on pink suede, the white shirt now growing taut on his back, then ballooning. But he saw it all as if through a dream. "All children, it was glorious in the woods," the voice was saying. "The beaches, the gloom, the bindweed. Keep in rhythm." Martha, with half-closed eyes, was looking with interest at this face, which she was seeing for the last time. Beside her lay his blazer. It contained the golden timepiece, the silver mustache brush, and a plump wallet. She was glad these things would not be lost. A little bonus. Somehow, she did not realize at that moment that the jacket with its contents would have to be thrown in the water too. This rather complicated question arose only later when the main matter had already been settled. Now her thoughts were circling slowly, almost languidly. The anticipation of hard-won happiness was ravishing. "I must admit I was wrong in thinking this would irritate my back. You promised, darling, it would be all right today, and sure enough it's much better. Remember, I've won the bet, and I can row 100 times better than that rascal behind me. My shirt keeps rubbing the itchy spots, and that feels good. I think I shall take off my tie." They were now sufficiently far from the shore. It was drizzling. A number of white spectators had found their seats on their black island. The tide joined the blazer. The wavelets broke and foamed around the boat. "Actually, it's my last day," said Dryer, energetically rowing. That tragic pronouncement left Franz unmoved. There already was nothing in the world that could shock him. Martha, however, gave her husband a curious glance. "Premonitions, eh?" "I have to leave for the city early tomorrow," he explained. "I just had a call." The rain was growing stronger. Martha glanced around, then looking at Franz, they could begin. "Listen, Kurt," she said quietly. "I feel like rowing a bit. You take Franz's place and Franz will steer." "No, wait, my love," said Dryer, trying to do as Franz was doing, to flatten his oars over the water, swallow-like on the backstroke. "I'm just getting warmed up. Franz and I have got our rhythm synchronized. His form is improving. Sorry, my love, I think I splashed you. I'm cold," said Martha. "Please get up and let me row." 5 more minutes, said Dryer, trying again to feather his oars, and again failing. Martha shrugged. The sensation of power was ecstatic. She was willing to prolong that sensation. 8 more strokes, she said with a smile. "The years of our marriage. I'll count." "Come on, don't spoil it." "We'll let you row soon. After all, I'm leaving tomorrow." He felt hurt that she was not interested to know why he had to go. She must think it was just a routine trip. "Some ordinary office business. An amusing surprise," he said casually. She was moving her lips with a singular concentration. "Tomorrow," he said, "I'm making $100,000 at one stroke." Martha, who had got to the end of her count, raised her head. "I'm selling an extraordinary patent. That's the kind of business we are doing." Franz suddenly laid down his oars and began wiping his glasses. For some reason he thought Dryer was talking to him, as he wiped the sweat and the rain away. He nodded and cleared his throat. Actually, he had reached a stage at which human speech, unless representing a command, was meaningless. "You didn't think I was so smart, eh?" said Dryer, who had also stopped rowing. "At one stroke, just think. I suppose this is one of your jokes," she said, frowning. "Word of honor," he said plaintively. "I'm the sole owner of a miraculous invention, and I'm going to sell it to Mr. Ritter, whom you know." "What is it, some kind of trouser press?" He shook his head. "Something to do with sports, with tennis?" "It's a big, glorious secret," he said, "and you're a goose not to believe me." She turned away, biting her chapped underlip, and stared for a long time at the inky horizon, where a gray fringe of rain hung against a narrow light-colored band of sky. "You're sure it's $100,000? Is that definite?" It was not, but he nodded and pulled at the oars, hearing that the rower behind him had resumed his work. "Can't you tell me a little more?" she asked, still looking away. "You're sure it won't drag on? You'll have that money in a few days?" "Well, yes, I hope so. And I'll come back here and we'll go rowing again, and Franz will teach me to swim." "It can't be. You're deceiving me," she cried. Dryer started to laugh, not understanding why she chose not to believe him. "I shall return with a great bag of gold," he said, like a medieval merchant back from Baghdad on a donkey. "Oh, I'm pretty certain I'll cinch the deal tomorrow." The rain would stop one moment and the next start pouring again, as if practicing. Dryer, not noticing how far out they had gone, began turning the boat with his right oar. Franz mechanically backed the water with his left. Martha sat lost in thought, now consulting the filling of a back tooth with her tongue, now running it over her lips. Presently Dryer offered to let her row. She gave a silent shake of her head. The rain now came down in earnest, and Dwyer felt its soothing coolness through the raw silk of his shirt. He tingled with vigor. This was such great fun. With every stroke he rowed better. The shore appeared through the mist. One could make out the flags and striped shelters. The long pier was beginning slowly and carefully to take aim at the moving target of their boat. "Soon you'll be back Saturday, not later than Saturday?" asked Martha. Franz could see through Dwyer's soaked shirt. Flesh-colored patches which slowed now here, now there, a geography of hideous pink, depending on which country adhered to the skin in process of rowing. "Saturday or Sunday," Dwyer said zestfully, and as the surf adopted him, he caught a crab. The rain lashed down. Martha's robe enveloped her in heavy humidity that made her ribs ache. What could she care about? Neuralgia, bronchitis, irregular heartbeat. She was entirely immersed in the question. Was she doing the right thing or not? Yes, she was. Yes, the sun would again shine. They would go boating again now that he had discovered this new sport. Every now and then she would glance past her husband at Franz. He would be perplexed and disappointed. "Poor pet, he is tired. His poor mouth is open. My baby, never mind. We'll soon be back, and you'll rest, and I'll bring you some brandy, and we'll lock the door." Lindy was returned intact. Bending their heads under the fierce downpour, our three holidayers walked across soggy dark sand, then up slippy steps to the desolate promenade. When they finally reached their apartment, Martha unpleasantly surprised to find the door open. The two maids she disliked most, once a thief and the other a slut, were busy, too busy making her room, which she had told them to do always, plunked at 10, and now it was almost noon. But a strange apathy weighed upon her. She said nothing and went into Dwyer's bedroom. There she pulled on her heavy robe and sank into an armchair, feeling too tired to peel off her bathing suit and get a towel from the bathroom. Anyway, her husband was in the bathroom. She saw him through the open door, naked, full of ruddy life, various parts of his anatomy leaping. He was giving himself a robust rub-down, and howling every time he touched his red-blotched shoulders. One of the girls knocked to say Madame's room was ready, and Martha had to make great effort in order to undertake the long journey to the next room. She washed and dressed with infinite intervals of languor. A turtleneck, thick red sweater, which Franz had lent her on an esplanade the night before, or was it 2 nights, looked a little too masculine, but it was the warmest thing she could find. However, it hardly muffled the fits of shivering that kept tormenting her body, while in her mind was enjoying such peace, such euphoria. Of course she had done the right thing. Moreover, the dress rehearsal had gone perfectly. Everything was under control. "Everything is under control," said Dwyer through the door. "I hope you are as hungry as I am. We'll have lunch in the grill in 10 minutes. I'll be waiting for you in the reading room." All she could envisage was a cup of black coffee and a little brandy. When her husband had gone, she stepped across the corridor and knocked on Franz's door. It was unlocked, the room was empty, his robe sprawled on the floor, and there were other untidy details, but she did not have the strength to do anything about it. She found him in a corner of the lounge. The barmaid, a skinny artificial blonde, was bothering him with vulgar small talk. Meanwhile, the rain did not cease. The needle that marked on a roll, the violet graph of an atmospheric pressure, acquired a sacred significance. People of the promenade approached as if they would a crystal ball. Its competitor in the gallery, a conservative barometer, also refused to be proprietated either by prayer or by knuckle knock. Someone had forgotten a little red pail on the beach and was already filled to the brim with rainwater. The photographers moped. The restaurateurs rejoiced. One could find all the same faces, now in one cafe, now in another. Toward evening the rain thinned and then stopped. Dwyer held his breath as he made carom shots. The word spread that needle had risen 1 millimeter. "Fine weather tomorrow," said a prophet, expressively striking his palm with his fist. "Read it, night sailor's delight, despite the cold air." Many dined on public verandas. The evening mail arrived, a major event. On the promenade, after a dinner shuffling of many feet began under the lights, very misted by the damp. There was a dancing of the Kursaal. In the afternoon she had lain down under the quilt and 2 blankets, and the chill endured. For supper she could eat only a pickle and a couple of pale-cooked cherries. Now in the tan salon, she felt a stranger to the icy noise around. The black petals of the vaporous dress did not seem right, as if they would come apart at any moment. The tight touch of the silk on her calves and a strip of garter along her bare thigh were infertile contacts. The colored snowstorm of confetti left its flakes sticking to her bare back, and at the same time limbs and spine did not belong to her. A pain of another musical tone than intercostal neuralgia, or that strange ache in which a great cardiologist had told her came from a shadow behind the heart, entered into excruciating concords with the orchestra. The dance rhythm did not dull or delight her as it usually did, but instead traced an angular line, the graph of her fever, along the surface of her skin. With every movement of her head, a compact pain rolled like a bowling ball from temple to temple. One of the boat tables around the hall she had for a right-hand neighbor, the dance instructor, a famous young man who had flitted all summer from resort to like a velvet butterfly. On her left was Schwartz, the dark-eyed student, son of a Leipzig millionaire. The slipper under the table had apparently been kicked off by her. She heard Martha Dwyer ask questions, supply answers, comment on the horror of the thundering hall. The fizzy little stars of the champagne pricked an unfamiliar tongue without warming her blood or quenching her thirst. With an invisible hand she took Martha by the left wrist and felt her pulse. It was not there, however, but somewhere behind her ear or in the neck, or in the grinning instruments of the band, or in Franz and Dwyer, sitting opposite her. All around, growing from the hands of the dancers, glossy blue, red, green balloons bobbed on long strings, and each contained the entire ballroom, and the chandeliers and the tables and herself. The tight embrace of the foxtrot engendered no heat in her body. She noticed that Martha was dancing also, holding high a green world. Her partner, in full erection against her leg, was declaring his love in panting sentences from some lewd book. Again the stars of the champagne crept upwards, and the balloons resumed their bobbing, and again most of Martha's leg was in Weiss's crotch, and he moaned as his cheek touched hers, and the fingers explored her naked neck. She was sitting again at the table. Red, blue, green spots were swimming in Franz's glasses. Dwyer was guffawing vulgarly and slapping the table with his palm and leaning back. She extended her foot beneath the table and pressed. Franz gave a start, stood up, and bowed. She placed her hand on her austere, bony shoulder. How happy they had been! In the rhythm of that earlier novel, in those first chapters, under the picture of the dancing slave girl between the whirling dervishes, for one delicious moment, the music pierced her violet fog, reached her, enveloped her. Everything was fine again, for this was he, Franz, his shy hands, his breath, his soft fuzz on the back of his neck, under the fingernails, and those precious, adorable motions that she had taught him. Closer, closer, she murmured. Make me feel warm. I'm tired, he murmured back. I'm tired to death. Please don't do what you are doing, please. The music reared its trumpets and then collapsed. Franz followed her back to the table. People around her were clapping. The dancing instructor slipped past her with a bright yellow girl. Walnut-brown Mr. Vinomori, the iris brimming meaningfully in the white of his eyes, was bowing to her, enticing. She saw Martha Dwyer nestle up to him and begin a tango. Uncle and nephew remained sitting alone. Dwyer was beating time with his finger, watching the dancers, waiting for the recurrent return of his wife's green earrings, and with a kind of awe listening to the strong voice of a girl singer. Stocky and joyless, he bawled out, straining her throat, and prancing in time to the music, Montevideo, Montevideo is not the right place for mine Leo. She was jostled by the dancers, endlessly repeated the ear-splitting refrain. A fat man in tuxedo, her owner, hissed at her, telling her to choose some other song because nobody was enjoying it. Dwyer had heard this Montevideo both yesterday and the day before, and he was again filled with a bizarre melancholy and felt depressed for the poor, dumpy girl. When her voice cracked on a note and she recovered the tune with a brave smile, Franz sat beside him, shoulder to shoulder, and seemed also to be watching the dancers. He was a little drunk, and his muscles ached from the morning's rowing. He felt like letting his forehead fall onto the table and remain thus forever, between a full ashtray and an empty bottle, a reptile, a supple dragon was tormenting him elaborately and hideously, turning him inside out, and there was no end to that torment. A human being, after all, he was a human being, was not supposed to go on enduring such oppression. It was at that moment that Franz regained consciousness like an insufficiently drugged patient on the operating table. And as he came to, he knew that he was being cut open, and he would have howled horribly if he were not in an invented ballroom. He looked around, toying with the string of a balloon tied to a bottle. He saw reflected in a rococo mirror the meek back of Dwyer's head, nodding in time to the music. Franz looked away. His gaze became entangled amid the legs of the dancers and attached itself desperately to a gleaming blue dress. The foreign girl in the blue dress danced with a remarkably handsome man in an old-fashioned dinner jacket. Franz had long since noticed this couple. They had appeared to him in fleeting glimpses, like a recurrent dream image or a subtle leitmotiv. Now at the beach, now in a cafe, now on the promenade. Sometimes the man carried a butterfly net, the girl a delicately painted mouth and tender gray blue eyes, and her fiancé or husband or slender, elegantly bald and contemptuous of everything on earth but her, was looking at her with pride, and Franz felt envious of that unusual pair, so envious that his oppression, one is sorry to say, grew even more bitter, and the music stopped. They walked past him. They were speaking loudly. They were speaking a totally incomprehensible language. Your aunt dances like a goddess, said the student, sitting down beside him. I'm very tired, Franz remarked irreverently. I rowed a lot today. Rowing is very healthy sport. Meanwhile, Dwyer was saying with an ingratiating wink, Am I also permitted to invite you for a dance, if I promise not to tread on your feet? Get me out of here, said Martha. I'm not feeling well. 13. Barely awake and still blinking. His yellow pajamas unbuttoned on his pink stomach, Dwyer went out onto the balcony, the wet foliage scintillating blindingly. The sea was milky bluish, sparked with silver. On the adjacent balcony, his wife's bathing suit was drying. He returned to his darkish bedroom in a hurry to dress and leave for Berlin. At 8 o'clock, there was a bus that took 40 minutes to reach Swissdock on its railway. A taxi would bring him there in less than half an hour to catch an earlier train. He tried not to sing under the shower, so as not to disturb the neighbors. He had an enjoyable shave on the balcony in front of an absolutely stable and unbreakable new type of mirror screwed into the balustrade. Driving back into the penumbra, he briskly dressed. Very softly he opened the door into the adjacent bedroom. From the bed came Martha's rapid voice. "We're going to our tombola on a gondola. Please hurry." She often talked in her sleep, babbling about Franz, Frida, Oriental gymnastics. As he slapped his sides to check if he had distributed everything among the proper pockets, Dwyer laughed and said, "Goodbye, my love. I'm leaving for the city." She muttered something in a waking voice and said distinctly, "Give me some water. I'm in a hurry," he said. "You get it yourself, okay? Time for you to go swimming with Franz. Heavenly morning." He bent over the dark bed, kissed her hair, and walked through his own bedroom into the long corridor leading to the lift. He had his coffee on the Kurhaus terrace. He had 2 rolls with butter and honey. He consulted his watch and ate a third. On the beach one could see bright robes of early swimmers, and the sea was growing more and more luminous. He lit a cigarette and popped into a taxi that the concierge had called. The sea was left behind. By that time a few more bathers were dotting and flashing green-blue. From every balcony came the delicate tinkle of breakfast. Automatically tucking a hateful ball under his arm, Franz marched down the corridor and knocked on Martha's door. Silence. The door was locked. He knocked at Dreyer's door, entered, and found his uncle's room in disorder. He concluded correctly that Dreyer had already left for Berlin. A terrible day was in store. The door into Martha's room was ajar. It was dark there. Let her sleep. This was good. He started to tiptoe away. From the darkness came Martha's voice. "Why don't you give me that water?" she said with listless insistence. Franz located a decanter and a glass and moved toward the bed. Martha slowly raised herself, freed a bare arm, and drank avidly. He put the decanter back on the dresser and was about to resume his stealthy retreat. "Franz, come here," she called in that same toneless voice. He sat down on the edge of her bed, grimly expecting she would command him to fulfill a duty that he had managed to evade ever since they came here. "I think I am very ill," she said pensively, not raising her head from the pillow. "Let me ring you for coffee," said Franz. "It's sunny today, and here it's so dark." She began to speak again. "He's used up all the aspirin. Go to the pharmacy and get me some. And tell them to take that ore away. It keeps hurting me." "Ore? That's your hot water bottle. What's the matter with you?" "Please, Franz, I can't speak, and I'm cold. I need lots of blankets." He brought one from Dreyer's bedroom, and clumsily, carelessly, fuming at a woman's whim, covered her with it. "I don't know where the pharmacy is," he said. Martha asked, "You brought it? What have you brought?" He shrugged and went out. He found the pharmacy without difficulty. Besides the aspirin tablets, he bought a tube of shaving cream and a postcard with a view of the bay. The package had safely arrived, but Emmy wondered in her last letter if he was quite right in the head, and he thought he'd send her a few words of protest and reassurance. As he walked back to the hotel along the sunny promenade, he stopped to look down at the beach. He had separated the aspirin container from the shaving cream, which he now put into his pocket. A sudden breeze took possession of the paper baglet, which had contained both. At that moment the puzzling foreign couple overtook him. They were both in beach robes and walked rapidly conversing in their mysterious tongue. He thought that they glanced at him and fell silent for an instant. After passing him, they began talking again. He had the impression they were discussing him and even pronouncing his name. It embarrassed and incensed him that this darned happy foreigner hastening to the beach with his tanned, pale-haired, lovely companion knew absolutely everything about his predicament and perhaps pitied not without some derision an honest young man who had been seduced and appropriated by an older woman who, despite her fine dresses and face lotions, resembled a large white toad. And generally speaking, tourists at the swanky resorts are always inquisitive, mocking, cruel people. He felt the shame of his hairy nudity barely concealed by the charlatan robe. He cursed the breeze and the sea, and clutching the container with the tablets, entered the lobby of his hotel. The flimsy paper he had lost fluttered along the promenade, settled, fluttered again, and slithered past the happy couple. Then it was wafted toward a beach in the embrasure of the balustrade, where an old man sitting in the sun meditatively pierced it with the point of his cane. What happened to it next was not known. Those hurrying to the beach did not follow its fate. Wooden steps led down to the sand. One was anxious to reach the sea's slow, shining folds. The white sand sang underfoot. Among 100 similarly striped shelters, it was easy to recognize one's own, and not only by the number it bore. Those rentable objects grow accustomed to their chance owner remarkably fast, becoming part of its life simply and trustfully. 3 or 4 shelters away it was Dryer's niche. Now it stood empty. Neither Dryer nor his wife nor his nephew was there. A huge rampart of sand surrounded it. A little boy in red trunks was climbing all over that rampart, and the sand trickled down, sparkling, and presently a whole chunk of it crumbled. Miss Dryer would not have liked to see such strange children ruining her fortress. Within its confines and around them, the impatient elements had already had time to scramble the prints of bare feet. No one could distinguish how Dryer's robust imprint from Franz's narrow sole. A while later Schwartz and Weiss came over, saw with surprise that nobody was there yet. Fascinating, adorable woman, one of them said, and the other looked across the beach of the promenade at hotels beyond it and replied, "Oh, I'm sure they'll be down in a few minutes. Let's go for a swim and come back later." The shelter and its moat remained deserted. The little boy had run back to his sister, who had bought a blue pailful of toy water, and after magic manipulations and pattings was carefully shaking out of the pail an impeccably formed cone of chocolate sand. A white butterfly went by, battling the breeze. Flags flapped. The photographer's shout approached. Bathers entered the shallow water, moved their legs like skiers without their poles, and in the meantime, a cluster of these seaside images, gleams on the green folding wave, were traveling south at 50 miles an hour, comfortably connected in Dryer's mind. The further he traveled from the sea in the Berlin Express, the more insistently they demanded attention. The foretaste of the affairs awaiting him in the city grew a little insipid at the thought that very moment he was being transformed again into a businessman. With a businessman's schemes and fancies, and there by the sea, on the white sand of true reality, he was leaving freedom behind, and the closer he came to the metropolis, the more attractive seemed to him that shimmering plage that one could see like a mirage from a rock point. At home, the gardener informed him of Tom's death. The dog, he thought, had been hit by a truck. It was found unconscious and had died, he said, in his arms. Dryer gave him 50 marks for his sympathy, reflecting sadly that nobody besides that rather coarse old soldier had really loved the poor beast. At the officer he learned that Mr. Ritter would meet him not in the lobby of the Adelhof, but at the bar of the Royal. Before going there, he rang up Isolde at her mother's at Spandau, and pleaded abjectly for a brief date later in the evening, but Isolde said she was busy and suggested he call her again tomorrow or the day after tomorrow and take her to the premiere of the film King, Queen, Knave, and then one would see. His American guest, a pleasant, cultured person with steel-gray hair and triple chin, asked about Martha, whom he had met a couple of years before, and Dryer was disappointed to discover that all English learned since the day of that pleasant party was not sufficient to cope with the nasal pronunciation of Mr. Ritter, whereupon the latter courteously switched to an old-fashioned brand of German. Another disappointment awaited Dryer at the laboratory. Instead of the 3 automaticons promised him, only 2 were available for the show. The initial elderly gentleman, wearing a replica of Dryer's blue blazer, and a stiff-looking bronze-wigged lady in a green dress with high cheekbones and masculine chin. "You might have done it a little more bosom," observed Dryer reproachfully. "Scandinavian type," said the inventor. "Scandinavian type," said Dryer. "Female impersonator, rather. An amalgam, if you like. We ran into some trouble. A rib failed to function properly. After all, I need more time than God did, Mr. Director, and I'm sure you'll love the way her hips work." "Another thing," said Dryer. "I don't much care for the old chap's necktie. You must have got it in Croatia or Liechtenstein. Anyway, it is not one of those my store provided. In fact, I remember the one he had on last time. It was a beautiful light blue, like yours." Moritz and Max tittered. "I confess," said the inventor calmly, "to have borrowed it for this important occasion." He started to worry the front stud of the tall collar under his rustling beard, but before it could spring, Dryer had already swished off his own pearl gray tie and remained with an open shirt collar for the rest of his known existence. Mr. Ritter was dozing in an armchair in the theater. Dryer coughed loudly. His guest woke up, rubbing his eyes like a child. The show started. Gyrating her angular hips, the woman passed across the stage more like a streetwalker than a sleepwalker. She was followed by the drunken viveur. Presently she jerked by again in a mink coat, reeled, recovered, completed her agonizing stretch, and the sound of a massive thud came from the wings. Her would-be client did not appear. There was a long pause. "That mill you bought me was certainly something," said Mr. Ritter. "I'll have my revenge with Madame, and you visit me in Miami next spring. I have a Spanish chef who worked for years in a French restaurant in London, so you do really get quite a cosmopolitan menu." This time the woman drifted past on slow roller skates, in a black evening dress, her legs rigid, her profile like that of a skull, her décolleté revealing a tricot smudged by the hasty hands of her maker. His 2 accomplices failed to catch her behind the scenes, where her brief career ended in an anonymous clatter. There was another pause. Dryer wondered what aberration of the mind had ever made him accept, let alone admire, these tipsy dummies. He hoped the end of the show had come, but Mr. Ritter and he had not yet seen the best number. White-gloved in an evening dress, one hand raised to his top hat, the old chap entered, looking refreshed and gay. He stopped in front of the spectators and started to remove his hat in a complicated, much too complicated salute. Something crunched. "Halt!" howled the infidel with great presence of mind and darted toward the mechanical maniac. Too late! The hat was doffed with a flourish, and the arm came off too. A photographer's black curtain was mercifully drawn. "How have you liked?" asked Dryer in English. "Fascinating," said Mr. Ritter and started to leave. "You'll hear from me in a couple of days. I have to decide, you see, which of the two projects to finance." "Is the other similar?" No. Oh, goodness, no. The other has to do with running water in luxury hotels. Water made to produce recognizable tunes. The music of water in a literal sense. An orchestra of faucets. Wash your hands in a barcarola. Bathe in Lohengrin. Rinse your silver in Debussy. Or drown in Bach, punned Dryer. He spent the rest of the evening at home trying to read an English play called Candida, and every now and then lapsing into lazy thought. The automaticans had given all they could give. Alas, they had been pushed too far, blue-bearded, and squandered his hypnotic force, and now they had lost all significance, all life and charm. He was grateful to them, in a vague sort of way, for the magical tasks they had performed, the excitement, the expectations, but they had only disgusted him now. He worked through another scene, dutifully leafing through his dictionary at every stumble. He would ring up Isolde tomorrow. He would hire a pretty English girl to teach him the language of Shaw and Galsworthy. He would simply resell the invention to Bluebeard. Ah, a brilliant idea. For a token of sum of $10. How quiet the house was. No Tom, no Martha. She was not a good loser, poor girl. All at once he understood what subtle extra was added to the lifeless silence. All the clocks had stopped in the house. A little after 11 he rose from his comfortable seat and was about to go up to the bedroom when the telephone placed a cold hand on his shoulder. He was now speeding in a hired limousine, driven by a broad-shouldered chauffeur, through an infinite nocturnal expanse of woods and field, and northern towns, their names garbled by the impatient darkness: Neusack, Wusterbeck, Pritzburg, Nabucco. Their weak lights fumbled at him in passing. The car shook and swayed, and it had been promised they would make it in 5 hours, but they did not, and a gray morning was already outside with bicycles weaving among crawling trucks when he reached Swisstock, from which it was just 20 miles to Gravitz. The desk clerk, a dark-haired young man with hollow cheeks and big glasses, informed him that one of their guests happened to be Professor Lister of international fame. He had visited Madame last night and was with her now. As Dryer strode toward his apartment, the doctor, a tall, bald old man, in a monastic-looking dressing gown with a brown satchel under his arm, came out of Martha's room. "It is unheard of," he growled at Dryer without bothering to shake hands with him. "A woman has pneumonia with a temperature of 106 and nobody bothers. Her husband leaves her in that state and goes for a trip. His nephew is a nincompoop. If a maid had not alerted me last night, you would be still carousing in Berlin." "So the situation is serious," said Dryer. "Serious? The respiratory count is 50. The heart behaves fantastically. It is not a normal organ for a woman of 29. 34. Said Dryer. "There is a mistake in her passport." "Or 34. Anyway, she should be transported at once to Swisstock Clinic, where I can have her treated adequately." "Yes, at once," said Dryer. The old man nodded crossly and swept away. One of the maids Martha disliked, the one who had stolen at least 3 handkerchiefs in as many days, was now dressed as a nurse. She had worked in winter at the clinic. Plain brown or the heather tweed. Franz on the terrace of the cafe was in the middle of a nervous yawn when the doctor billowed past, heading for a quick swim before going to Swisstock. Plain brown. Gruff Lester could not help being touched by the young fellow's dejection and shouted to him for the promenade, "Your uncle is here." Franz went up to Dryer's room and stood listening to the moaning and muttering in the adjacent room. Would fate allow her to divulge her secrets? He knocked very lightly on the door. Dryer came out of the sick room, and he likewise was touched by Franz's distraught appearance. Presently, from the balcony, they saw the ambulance enter the drive. Over the waves, small angular waves that rose and fell in time to her breathing, Martha floated in a white boat, and at the oars sat Dryer and Franz. Franz smiled at her over Dryer's bent head, and she saw her gay parasol reflected in the happy gleam of his glasses. Franz was wearing one of the long nightshirts that had belonged to his father, and continued to smile at her expectantly as the boat dipped and creaked as if on springs, and Martha said, "It's time, we can begin." Dryer stood up, Franz stood up also, and both reeled, laughing heartily, locked in an involuntary embrace. Franz's long shirt rippled in the wind, and now he was standing alone, still laughing and swaying, and out of the water a hand protruded. "Take the oar. Hit him!" cried Martha, choking with laughter. Franz, standing firmly on the blue glass of the water, raised the oar, and the hand disappeared. They were now alone in the boat, which was no longer a boat but a cafe with one large marble table, and Franz was sitting opposite her, and his odd attire had ceased to matter. They were drinking beer. How thirsty she was! Franz shared her unsteady glass while Dryer kept slapping the table with his wallet to summon the waiter. "Now," she said, and Franz said something in Dryer's ear, and Dryer got up, laughing, and they both went away. While Martha waited, her chair rose and fell. It was a floating cafe. Franz came back alone, carrying her late husband's blue jacket over his arm, and he nodded to her significantly and tossed it in the empty chair. Martha wanted to kiss Franz, but the table separated them, and the marble edge bit into her chest. Coffee was brought, 3 pots, 3 cups, and it took her some time to realize there was one portion too many. The coffee was too hot, so she decided that since a drizzle had set in, it was best to wait for the rain to dilute the coffee. But the rain was hot too, and Franz kept urging her to go home, pointing at their villa across the road. "Let's begin," she said. All 3 got up, and Dryer, pale and sweaty, started to pull on his blue jacket. That perturbed her. It was dishonest. It was illegal. She gestured in mute indignation. Franz understood, and talking to him firmly, began leading away Dryer, who staggered as he fumbled for the armhole of his blazer. Franz returned alone, but no sooner had he sat down than Dryer appeared from another direction, furtively making his way back, and his face was now utterly ghastly and inadmissible. With a sidelong glance at her, he shook his head and seated himself without a word at the oars of the bed. Martha was overcome by such impatience that as soon as the bed began to move, she screamed. The new boat rowed through the long corridors. She wanted to stand up, but an oar blocked her way. Franz rowed steadily. Something kept telling her that not all had been properly done. She remembered the jacket. The blue jacket lay at the bottom of the boat. Its arms looked empty, but the back was not flat enough. In fact, it bulged. It humped suspiciously, and now the 2 sleeves were swelling. She saw the thing trying to rise on all 4s, and grabbed it, and she swung it back and forth and hurled it out of the boat. But it would not sink. It slithered from wave to wave as if alive. She nudged it with an oar. It clutched at the oar, trying to clamber aboard. Franz reminded her that it was still contained the watch, the coat, and now a blue mackintosh, since the water slowly sank, limply moving its exhausted sleeves. They watched it disappear. Now the job was done. An enormous turbulent joy engulfed her. Now it was easy to breathe. That drink they had given her was a wonderful poison, benedictine and bile, and her husband was already dressed, saying, "Hurry up, I'm taking you to a ball." But Franz had mislaid her jewels. Before leaving with her to the hospital, Dryer told Franz to hold the fort. They would be back in a few days. There was probably not much difference, basically, between Martha's delirium and her wretched lover's state of mind. Once on the eve of a school examination, when he desperately needed a passing mark in order to not repeat a whole class year, a clever, sly boy had said to him there was a trick that always worked if you knew how to apply it. With the utmost clarity, with all the forces of your mind bunched up in an iron fist, you had to visualize not what you wanted, not the passing mark, not her death, not freedom, but the other possibility, failure, the absence of your name from the list of those who had passed, and a healthy, ravenous, implacable Martha returning to her merry seaside inferno to make him carry out the scheme they had postponed. But according to the boy's advice, that did not suffice. The really hard part of the trick was ignoring success utterly and naturally, as if the very thought of it did not exist in one's mind. Franz could not recall if he had achieved that feat in the case of the examination, which eventually he did pass, but he knew that he was incapable of managing it now. No matter how distinctly he imagined the 3 of them sitting again on the terrace of the Marmora Tavern and renewing the wager, and again getting Dryer into the boat, he would notice out of the corner of his eye that the boat had floated away without them, and that Dryer was telephoning from the hospital to say that she was dead. Going to the other extreme, he allowed himself the dangerous luxury of imagining the freedom, the ecstasy of the freedom awaiting him. Then, after that awful volupty of thought, he tried other ways of tricking fate. He counted the boats for hire and added their sum to that of the number of the people in the open-air cafe on the beach, telling them that odd would mean death. The number was odd, but now he wondered if somebody had not left or come while he counted. The day before, he had resolved to take advantage of solitude and make a purchase that Dryer might have ridiculed with his usual wit, and Martha thought frivolous at such critical time in their lives. It was his old dream of fashionable plus-fours. He had spent a couple of hours in several shops. He had practically bought a pair, but then had said he'd think it over and decide which he wanted, the brown or the purplish tweed. He now returned to that shop and tried on the plain brown pair, and it turned out to be a little too wide in the waist. He said he would take it if they could make the adjustment before closing time. This they promised. He also bought 2 pairs of brown woolen stockings. Then he went for a swim, and after that 3 of 4 brandies at the bar, vainly waiting for the attractive blonde to get rid of 2 elderly men flirting with her ponderously and obscenely. Suddenly it occurred to him that his choosing the more conservative tint meant his having envisaged death rather than life, which those confetti-like specks in the tweed might suggest. But when he returned to the the plus-4s were ready, and he did not have the courage to change his order. Next morning, Franz, wearing the new plus-4s and a turtleneck sweater, was looking at the rain over his second cup of after-lunch coffee when the desk clerk, who resembled him according to Uncle Clown, brought him 2 messages. Dreyer had telephoned that Madame wanted her emerald earrings, and Franz immediately realized that if Madame contemplated going to a dance, no death was expected. The clerk explained that Mr. Director Dreyer wanted his nephew to get those jewels from his aunt's dresser and drive in a taxi to Swisstock without delay. She had evidently recovered from a slight cold so swiftly that the doctor allowed her to go out that very night. Franz reflected bitterly that of all the contingencies that attempted to forestall, this was the only one he had not imagined specifically. The other message was a telegram that had been read over the telephone and transcribed thus by a multilingual desk. Wish tu clinch deal muss have that drunk stop 100 OK Ritter. It made no sense, but who cared? Cursing Lister, the miracle worker, he rode up in the lift with a pseudo Franz, a stout locksmith, a hoarse-voiced and reeking of beer. The key was in Martha's handbag, which had gone with her to Swisstock. The locksmith started working on the lock of the dresser. He wiped his nose and went down on one knee, then on both. The false Franz and the more or less real one stood side by side, staring at his dirty soles. The drawer was finally extricated. Franz opened a black jewel box and showed the emeralds to the gloomy clerk. Half an hour later he arrived at the hospital, a new white building in a pine grove on the outskirts of the town. The taxi-man demanded a tip and slammed the door angrily when Franz shook his head. A remarkably cheerful nurse had another message for him. His uncle, she said with a happy smile, was expecting him at the inn about a mile down the highway. Franz walked the distance with his left hand pressed to his left side, where the jewel box bulged. They shaved slightly between the thighs. As he approached the inn, he saw Martha come out of it briskly and consult the sky, one finger on the trigger of her umbrella. She gave Franz a quick look and went the way he had come. She was younger than Martha, the mouth was different, but the eyes and the walk were Martha's. That meant a gay reunion at a Swisstock inn, uncle, nephew, and 2 aunts. He found Dreyer in the hall of the inn. He was inspecting an ornamental pewter and kept looking at it, even when Franz was already thrusting the black box and the telegram into the vicinity of his person. Dreyer thrust both in his pocket without opening either, and replaced the pewter on his hook. He turned toward Franz, who saw only then that it was not Dreyer, but a demented stranger in a rumpled open shirt, with swollen eyes and a tawny stubbled, trembling jaw. "It's too late," he said, "too late to put on for the dance, but still not too late to wear." He pulled Franz by the sleeve with such force that Franz almost lost his balance, but Dreyer only wanted to lead him to the desk. "Take him up," he said with the innkeeper's widow, and then, turning to Franz, "We'll have to stay here till tomorrow. The worst formalities begin afterwards. Go to your room now. Hilda has just come from Hamburg. She will fetch you in a couple of hours." "Is it?" began an amazed Franz. "Is it? Is it all over?" asked the new sobbing Dreyer. "Oh, it is over. Now go." Franz attempted to catch his benefactor's hand and shake it in token of ardent condolence, but Dreyer dreadfully mistook the adumbrated gesture for the rudiment of an embrace, and wet bristles came in brief contact with Franz's glowing cheek. Her last words had been, in a sweet, remote voice he had never heard before, "Darling, where did you put my emerald slippers? No, I mean earrings. I want them. We shall all dance. We shall all die." And then, with her good old familiar sharpness, "Frida, why's the dog here again? He was killed. He can't be here any more." And the fools say second sight does not exist. Franz followed the old woman upstairs. She led him into a darkened room. Quickly she threw back the shutters. Quickly she opened the lower stage of the bed table to see if the night pot was there. Quickly she left. Franz marched to the open window. Dreyer crossed the road and sat down on a bench under a tree. Franz closed the window. He was now alone. A woman in the next room, a miserable tramp whom a commercial traveler had jilted, heard through the thin wall what sounded like several revelers all talking together, and roaring with laughter, and interrupting one another, and roaring again, a frenzy of young mirth. About the author. Vladimir Nabokov was born in St. Petersburg on April 23, 1899. His family fled to Germany in 1919 during the Bolshevik Revolution. Nabokov studied French and Russian literature at Trinity College, Cambridge from 1919 to 1923, then lived in Berlin 1923, 1937, and Paris 1937 to 1940, where he began writing mainly in Russian under the pseudonym Sirin. In 1940 he moved to the United States, where he pursued a brilliant literary career as a poet, novelist, critic, and translator, while teaching literature at Wellesley College, Stanford, Cornell, and Harvard. The monumental success of his novel Lolita, 1955, enabled him to give up teaching and devote himself fully to his writing. In 1961 he moved to Montreux, Switzerland, where he died in 1977. Recognized as one of the century's master prose stylists in both Russian and English, He translated a number of his original English works, including Lolita, into Russian, and collaborated on English translations of his original Russian works. And that was King, Queen, Knave by Nabokov. I feel like that book is just so brilliant because it really just perfectly depicts the way that when somebody has brainwashed you, like the way that you fall under a kind of spell, and like there are moments where you'll kind of like come back out of it and see things for what they really are. And you see that with Franz. He becomes robotic, especially towards the end. He's become so robotic, and what you don't realize until like almost the very end, like in the last chapter, is that he actually is trying to undo the brainwashing by trying to imagine that he's going through with the very thing that he does not want, in order to hopefully trick fate and get the wanted outcome. But Dreyer, of course, even though Dreyer seems kind of like blind throughout, it's funny how Franz is actually, he's got glasses, but the one who is blind is Dreyer, and that's kind of like a funny thing there too, is that Dreyer is the one who's blind. He sees murderers and criminals and like burglars and like everybody else except for Franz and Martha, who are planning his own demise. And so in a way he's blind, but in a way he becomes kind of like it's like he loves her, but he also realizes that she, like, he has to realize deep down that she's only interested in his money, nothing else. And yeah, and then also Martha's own like delirium is kind of hinted at throughout the story, especially with the thing about her talking about the police officer. It's also implied throughout the book that she may have had some sort of weird actually had something weird to do with the actual problem of the driver wrecking the car, the drunk driver, who was supposed to be their personal driver, causing car accidents. And Dreyer suspects that the guy is drunk, but I think earlier in the book it describes, like, when it's describing like just various people throwing themselves at Martha and her resisting them, like not being interested in them. I think the driver's actually one of those people who gets rejected by her. Another interesting thing, the couple on the beach who are talking about Franz, I think they're definitely supposed to be Vladimir Nabokov and Vera. Not only that, but there's this interesting thing he does in his books, and I guess it must have started with this one. But there's this thing he does of having people having duplicate, like doppelgangers, and you have to figure out which one is really, are we supposed to really believe is the one we're hearing about, and if somebody is actually just watching themselves out of body. And it's very interesting when that happens in one of his books, and he's had it happen in several books after it, but That's always an interesting thing there with, like, it's an actor. It's mentioned that the character Franz is supposed to resemble, but then later on it's some other person that he's supposed to resemble, and it's just brought up all throughout it. It's just very interesting. And you also see kind of like, you could see how the same themes are used later on in books of his, like Laughter in the Dark, and even in Despair somewhat. Although with Despair it's a lot more removed because you're not focusing on the affair that's happening, but you're really focusing on the man who's married to the woman having the affair. What's very weird to me, though, is that the back of the book makes it sound like this is about Dreyer, and it's not. It's about Franz. Interesting. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you have anything that that really stuck out to you about the story, this is the second time of me reading this book aloud for YouTube. But again, I lost the original videos of me reading several books on YouTube. If you have any, if there are any details that really stuck out to you, or just anything you'd like to say about the book, always remember you can comment anything for discussion. Thank you for listening.